Why didn't you tell me he existed? Ethan Whitford's voice cut through the cavernous dining hall like shards of glass. His gray eyes blazed, sharp enough to pierce the chandelier's reflections. All these years. And you hid him? Amara Benson's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the heavy curtains. Her body pressed protectively against the small, soft bundle of her son. Malik peeked out from the folds, wide-eyed, tiny fingers clutching the edge of her blouse. The polished floors of the Whitford estate reflected Ethan's storming figure, the silverware and crystal trembling slightly under the force of his anger. I didn't want anyone to—" Amara's voice faltered. "I just wanted him to be safe. I didn't know what else to do." Ethan's jaw clenched. His usual composure was gone, replaced by raw disbelief. Every inch of the room screamed perfection, wealth, and control. But the sight of Malik, so small and innocent, stripped it all bare. The gathered staff, all frozen mid-step, felt the tension like a physical weight pressing down. Amara, 23, stood in her worn but neat uniform, shoulders squared despite the fear in her chest. Her skin glowed under the chandelier lights, rich brown against the stark white walls, her deep eyes shimmering with a mix of defiance and desperation. Every gesture, every breath, was protective. Her curls were pinned back carefully, yet a few strands framed her anxious face, softening her sharp, anxious features. Malik, just 2, had inherited his mother's dark eyes and tender smile. He had never seen Ethan before this moment, yet instinctively he shrank closer to Amara, sensing the storm in the man before him. Ethan's hands were fists at his sides, white-knuckled, but it was his voice that betrayed him more than any movement. "Do you understand what you've done?" His tone was not merely anger, it was a collision of shock, betrayal, and something else he refused to name. I know it looks bad, but I only wanted him to be safe. "I've never asked for anything from you," Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet steady in its honesty. The room was silent, except for Malik's soft whimpers. Even the stately house seemed to hold its breath, as though the walls themselves were witnessing the fracture in the otherwise untouchable Whitford image. Ethan took a step closer, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble. He towered over Amara, yet there was a hesitation in his stride, a crack in the armor he wore like a second skin. "Safe? Safe from me?" His voice rose, echoing across the hall, and the servants flinched, accustomed to his temper, but unprepared for the confusion and vulnerability that flickered across his face. Amara's gaze never wavered. "Yes, safe. You wouldn't understand. You live in a world where everyone fears losing power or status. I only care about him." For a moment, the storm in Ethan's eyes faltered. He studied her, really looked at her, the way she carried herself despite her fear, the way she had protected Malik from a world that would judge, punish, and humiliate them both. Something tightened in his chest, a pang of something unfamiliar, something he hadn't felt in years. Guilt, or maybe recognition of a humanity he had long denied. Malik tugged at Amara's sleeve. His soft voice broke through Ethan's thoughts. "Mama." Ethan froze, the room spinning slightly as he watched the child look at him without fear, only curiosity. A pang of something sharp and unexpected tore through him, something he had buried under ambition and arrogance. The household staff watched, mouths slightly agape, as the untouchable billionaire seemed to shrink in a way none of them had ever seen. Whispers spread quietly along the walls, carrying both judgment and awe at Amara's bravery. Amara took a careful step forward, drawing Malik closer. "He's innocent, sir. He didn't ask to be born into this world of rules and expectations. I only tried to protect him." Ethan's fists slowly unclenched, but his body remained rigid, his mind a battlefield. He was the master of this estate, feared in boardrooms and ballrooms alike. Yet here he was, confronted with the raw power of a mother's love, a force he couldn't calculate or control. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice lower, trembling slightly despite the effort to mask it. "You've kept him hidden all this time?" "Yes," Amara said firmly, though the fear behind her eyes was palpable. "Because if anyone knew, they wouldn't understand. They'd take him away, or worse. I couldn't risk that." Ethan's breath hitched, and he stepped back, a sharp intake of air betraying the storm inside. He had spent his life building walls, controlling every situation, yet he felt powerless now. In front of a child and a young mother, all his authority felt fragile, brittle, and meaningless. Malik, sensing the tension, began to cry softly, hiding his face against Amara's shoulder. She bent slightly, whispering reassurances, rocking him gently. Ethan watched, the edges of his carefully curated world shattering piece by piece. For the first time in his life, Ethan Whitford confronted a reality he could not dominate. Love and protection that existed beyond power, wealth and control. And in that quiet, shattering moment, the stage was set, not just for a conflict of wealth and status, but for a collision of morality, humanity, and redemption. The story of Amara, Malik, and Ethan was no longer about secrecy. It was about reckoning. The morning after the revelation, the Whitford estate hummed with a tension that vibrated through every corridor. The grand halls, usually echoing with polite greetings and muted footfalls, now carried whispers, staff exchanging hurried glances, the crystal chandeliers trembling faintly as if aware of the fragile new reality. Amara moved carefully, Malik cradled against her chest, his little head resting on her shoulder. She wore her usual uniform, but the crispness of it seemed to mock the turmoil inside her. Every step was calculated, as though the polished floors themselves could betray her slightest misstep. "Don't worry, baby," she murmured softly, pressing a kiss to the top of Malik's dark curls. "We'll get through this. Mama's got you." But even as she spoke, the echo of Ethan's confrontation from last night haunted her. The fear in his voice, the shock, and the something she couldn't yet name. It lingered. Was it guilt, regret, or merely curiosity that could turn to wrath? She didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. Ethan, meanwhile, had retreated to his office, the door closing with a definitive click that sounded more like a cage than privacy. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, the morning sun casting sharp lines across his face, accentuating the cold angles that everyone else admired. But today, even those features seemed strained, tired. He rubbed at his temples, the control he prided himself on slipping like sand through clenched fists. His assistant, a poised young woman named Charlotte, entered cautiously. "Sir, breakfast is ready, and the staff, there's chatter. About Amara. About the child." Ethan's eyes snapped to her, sharp and calculating. "Do I need to know?" Charlotte hesitated, biting her lip. They're concerned. Some think it's scandalous. Others admire her courage. But, sir, some of the kitchen staff are whispering, calling her reckless, foolish. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. His world demanded order, yet this revelation had shaken every pillar. "Foolish?" he muttered. "Is protecting your child foolish?" He stared out the window, the skyline reflecting in his eyes like shards of a broken mirror. Meanwhile, in the servants' wing, Amara faced her own trials. The staff, usually cordial but distant, now treated her with a mixture of pity, suspicion, and veiled judgment. Small humiliations punctuated the day. A dropped tray here, a whispered remark there, but each cut deeper than the last because they struck at her dignity as a mother and a person. One of the older maids, Ruth, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, approached cautiously. "Amara, I know you're trying to do right by the boy, but you've stirred the master's temper, and the house, it's not kind to those who step out of line." Amara's jaw tightened. "I'm not stepping out of line. I'm keeping him safe. That's not a crime." Ruth's eyes softened. "It may not be a crime, but it'll feel like one here. You'll be tested every day." And test her they did. Later that afternoon, in the grand kitchen, Ethan appeared unexpectedly. His presence was like a cold wind blowing through the hearth, sharp and unyielding. Amara froze, Malik shifting in her arms. "You thought you could hide him forever," Ethan said, voice low but taut with controlled intensity. "Do you have any idea the chaos you've caused? The embarrassment?" Amara's heart pounded, but she held his gaze. "He is my son. He is innocent. You don't get to punish him for the mistakes of the world." Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Punish? I'm not punishing him. I'm shocked. I've never had anyone defy me like this. Never had anyone protect something from me and show me I have no say." His voice cracked slightly, though he caught it quickly. Amara felt a flicker of triumph, though tempered by fear. Ethan's control had always been absolute, and now, for the first time, she saw him vulnerable. But it was a dangerous vulnerability, a storm waiting to erupt. The day worsened when the house's social calendar pressed on, and a visiting journalist arrived for a charity feature. Rumors had already begun to spread in the city. Whispers of a secret child, a scandal hidden behind marble walls. Ethan, determined to maintain the Whitford image, insisted on the journalist seeing only him, carefully omitting Amara's presence. But the journalist, sharp-eyed and curious, noticed the tension. During the lunch gathering, Malik, unrestrained by adult rules, wandered into the drawing room. The moment was brief but catastrophic. A soft giggle escaped him, drawing every eye, including Ethan's. Whispers erupted instantly. Charlotte's polite smile faltered, and the journalist scribbled furiously, sensing a story far juicier than the planned feature. Ethan's face darkened. His carefully constructed control had been shattered publicly, and the humiliation burned hotter than any anger he'd felt in years. He moved toward Amara, who instinctively shielded Malik behind her. This is reckless," he barked, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. "I am not reckless," Amara said, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I am protecting him. That is all." Malik clung to her, his little arms tight around her neck. The innocence in his wide eyes contrasted sharply with the rigid, cold world Ethan commanded. For a moment, the power dynamics seemed almost irrelevant. A mother's love held more weight than money, influence, or intimidation. That afternoon, whispers turned into gossip, gossip into judgment, and judgment into what felt like a campaign against her. The injustice was suffocating, but Amara's resilience grew stronger. Every insult, Every sideways glance became fuel, not for anger, but for protection, courage, and careful defiance. Ethan, however, wrestled with a storm inside. Every interaction with Amara and Malik revealed a chink in his armor. He was powerful, ruthless, feared, but none of that mattered against the unyielding, tender force of a mother's love. And as the sun set over the Whitford estate, casting long shadows through the corridors, both Amara and Ethan felt the world shifting beneath their feet. The conflict was no longer just about a hidden child. It was about morality, empathy, and the fragile, dangerous intersection between love and control. The following morning arrived like a storm on the horizon, silent at first, deceptively calm, yet heavy with the weight of anticipation. Amara moved through the Whitford estate as though treading a minefield, Malik securely wrapped in a soft blanket across her chest. Even the sun streaming through the enormous windows seemed to cast a spotlight on her every action, magnifying the scrutiny of the household staff. She passed the grand staircase where several maids whispered behind their hands. "Did you see her yesterday?" one said, eyes wide. "Hiding that child." The master nearly exploded. Amara kept her head high, a quiet fire burning behind her dark eyes. She understood that in this house, perception was often more powerful than truth, and humility could be twisted into weakness. But she refused to let fear dictate her steps. Malik's gentle breathing against her shoulder reminded her why she had to endure it all. Meanwhile, Ethan's mood had transformed into something more insidious than mere anger. Obsession. He could not stop thinking about the mother and child who had so violently disrupted his world. He walked the halls with a restless intensity, his gray eyes cold and calculating, yet flickers of confusion and fascination betrayed the rigid control he normally maintained. That day, the family lawyer arrived with urgent documents. Ethan, still grappling with the aftermath of the public exposure, barely looked at them. His thoughts returned again and again to Amara and the child. How could someone hide something so important from me?" he muttered, pacing. "What else am I blind to? The law and wealth could control most things, but here they were powerless." That realization gnawed at him, as terrifying as it was unfamiliar. Back in the kitchen, Amara faced a new wave of injustice. One of the younger staff, emboldened by the whispers and Ethan's fury, began undermining her openly. "Maybe if you weren't so focused on the brat," she sneered, "you'd actually do your job properly. The master is already furious because of you." Amara's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm, steady as stone. "He is my responsibility first. Everything else comes second." The younger maid laughed cruelly. "Responsibility? Don't pretend like you're some hero. Everyone knows hiding a child in this house is madness." Malik stirred, sensing tension, and Amara's arms tightened around him. The humiliation was relentless, but every insult seemed to carve a stronger resolve into her spine. She was determined. No one would break her, and no one would harm her son. Ethan, observing the unfolding dynamics, felt a flicker of something he had long suppressed, recognition of injustice. Yet his pride and fear of appearing weak made him lash out in the only way he knew. He summoned Amara to the study that afternoon. The polished wood reflected the sharp lines of his jaw, the storm in his gray eyes. "You think you can walk around this house, flaunting your defiance?" he demanded. His voice was a whip, but underneath there was something raw, an inability to fully control the tidal wave of emotions she had stirred. Amara held Malik closer. I am not flaunting anything. I am protecting my child. That is not defiance. That is survival. Ethan's fist slammed against the desk. Papers rattled. Malik squeaked softly, startled, and Amara's heart clenched. For a fleeting moment, Ethan's cold ruthlessness broke through his self-restraint. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made the air heavy and electric. You are lucky he is a child. Lucky I do not. His words faltered, swallowed by the tension. In his chest, confusion battled with fury. He had never faced such a combination of innocence and courage. The injustice of the world seemed to manifest in that room. Amara, a servant, subject to ridicule and suspicion, held the moral high ground. Ethan, a man of immeasurable power, could control everything but the integrity of her maternal love. Outside, the city's whispers had begun to seep into the walls of the estate. Word of the hidden child and the confrontation with Ethan had reached the servants' social circles. Suddenly, the Whitford name was a story, not a shield. Amara's secret, once her only protection, had become a lightning rod for judgment. Yet she bore it with quiet grace, refusing to let it break her or Malik. Even Malik seemed to sense the weight of the house's scrutiny. That evening, as Amara tucked him into a modest crib in the servants' quarters, he whispered, "Mama, everyone's mad at me?" Amara kissed his forehead gently. "No, baby, no one can be mad at you. They don't understand you yet. But Mama will make sure you're safe." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her exhaustion, but she held him close, drawing courage from his warmth. Upstairs, Ethan stood by the window of his suite, watching the fading sun cast long shadows across the city. He clenched his hands, the reality of his own impotence gnawing at him. His pride had been humiliated, his control questioned. And yet, beneath the anger, a new, terrifying respect was forming. An acknowledgement that Amara was not merely a servant hiding a secret, but a woman whose love and courage challenged him in ways he had never anticipated. That night, the mansion was quiet, yet inside each character, tension coiled like a living thing. Amara, exhausted but steadfast, vowed silently to protect her child. Ethan, sleepless and restless, wrestled with an unfamiliar vulnerability he could neither dominate nor ignore. Malik, oblivious to the human politics swirling around him, slept peacefully, his small hands clutching the edge of his blanket, dreaming only of the safety of his mother's arms. The stage was set. The collision between the ruthless billionaire and the courageous young mother was no longer avoidable. And somewhere between anger, fascination, and an uneasy respect, the story's true emotional stakes had begun to crystallize. Love, protection, and moral courage would challenge power, pride, and control in ways neither could ignore. Ethan Whitford's voice thundered through the grand hall like a storm breaking against glass. "I want answers, Amara. Every lie, every hidden day. I need to know why." Amara tightened her hold on Malik, his small fingers clutching her blouse. The boy's wide, innocent eyes shifted between her and Ethan, sensing the tension and fear radiating from both adults. I've already told you. I hid him to keep him safe. "Nothing more," she said, voice steady but trembling with the weight of the moment. "You think that excuses everything?" Ethan's gray eyes were fiery, storming with anger and something unfamiliar. Pain. His fists banged against the marble railing of the staircase, the sound reverberating through the cavernous hall. "Do you have any idea how reckless this is? How public this could have become?" Amara took a deep breath, her voice softening yet growing firmer with moral authority. Do you think it would have mattered? He's a child, innocent, and I would have done anything to protect him from a world that doesn't care about him, from people who would have judged him before even knowing him. Ethan froze, her words slicing through the armor he had built over decades. He had controlled empires, intimidated rivals, and manipulated social circles. Yet here, he was powerless. The realization hit him harder than any boardroom defeat. Love and morality were forces he could not dominate, cannot control, cannot bend to will. Malik whimpered softly, tugging at Amara's skirt. "Mama!" Amara crouched slightly, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "It's okay, baby. You're safe." And in that small, intimate gesture, something shifted in Ethan. The storm inside him faltered, splintering into shards of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: guilt, awe, and the painful recognition of his own failures. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, but the tremor in it betrayed the struggle within. Do you even know what it's like to live under constant judgment? To be powerless?" Amara looked at him, eyes unwavering. "I do, every day. But I also know what it's like to fight for someone who cannot fight for themselves. And I will never let him suffer because of others. Not now, not ever." The raw honesty of her words struck him like a physical blow. Ethan, always so in control, so commanding, felt the walls of his self-assured world crumble. He blinked rapidly, his chest tightening. I never considered that someone could be this strong for a child." Malik, sensing the shift in Ethan's demeanor, crawled slightly forward, tentative but trusting. Ethan's gray eyes softened as he knelt down, the motion unfamiliar, vulnerable. "Little one," he whispered, his voice cracking. I am sorry for the chaos, the fear. I didn't understand." Amara's heart constricted at the sight. The powerful, ruthless man, whose word had been law, now knelt before a 2-year-old child, broken and exposed. The sight was cinematic, heart-wrenching, a reversal of roles she could never have anticipated. Tears streamed down Ethan's face, unrestrained, raw. He was a man who had never admitted weakness, never allowed himself the luxury of vulnerability, and yet here he was, undone by the courage of a young mother and the innocence of a child. "You don't have to forgive me," he said, voice quivering. I don't deserve it." Amara's hand hovered near his shoulder, hesitant. Then, with a quiet grace, she allowed herself to offer a touch, not of submission, but of acknowledgement. "I don't forgive easily," she said softly. "But I see you. That's a start." The household, silent in the background, watched the scene unfold. The servants, who had once whispered judgment and scorn, now held their breaths. The spectacle was not one of power, but of humanity laid bare. Malik giggled softly, breaking the tension. He toddled toward Ethan, tiny hands reaching up. Ethan, still on his knees, opened his arms with a tentative, trembling trust. The child ran into his embrace, and for a moment, the cruel, commanding world of the Whitford estate faded, leaving only the fragile, extraordinary bond forming before their eyes. It was in that moment that Ethan truly understood. Wealth, influence, and control could not protect innocence. Only love, sacrifice, and courage could. And Amara, with every act of quiet defiance and maternal devotion, had demonstrated a strength he could never buy, command, or replicate. He lowered his forehead to Malik's, whispering apologies in a broken, trembling voice. Amara stood slightly back, her eyes glistening, watching as the man who had been untouchable broke down completely. The climax was raw, emotional, and irreversible. A billionaire, once feared and untouchable, was now humbled, brought to his knees by the moral and emotional truth of a mother's love. Amara, dignified and unbroken, had forced a reckoning not just upon him, but upon the entire household. The walls of the Whitford estate, witnesses to decades of power and pride, seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging that something rare, extraordinary, and human had transpired within their marble confines. For the first time, Ethan Whitford understood that true strength was not dominance, it was vulnerability, empathy, and the courage to protect those who could not protect themselves. And in that understanding, a new story began, one of reckoning, redemption, and an unshakable bond forming between the woman who had hidden her child and the man who had once ruled the world with fear. The morning after the confrontation, the Whitford estate felt lighter, though the tension still lingered like a fragile thread. The grand hallways, once echoing with whispers of judgment and fear, now hummed with a quieter, more respectful energy. Staff members moved carefully around Amara, exchanging cautious nods rather than hushed criticisms. Amara, holding Malik close, walked through the kitchen where previously she had faced whispered derision. Ruth, the older maid who had once warned her of the house's harsh realities, approached with a softer expression. "You handled yourself well," she said, her tone a mixture of admiration and humility. "I've seen masters break a man's spirit before, but you broke something stronger. You broke fear." Amara smiled faintly, still wary but heartened. "I didn't break fear, I just protected what matters." Meanwhile, Ethan was no longer the storm that had swept through the estate the day before. He moved with a subdued gravity, his usual commanding presence tempered by vulnerability. In his office, he reviewed the day's correspondence, yet his mind was elsewhere. On Malik's small hands, Amara's unwavering strength, and the raw, emotional reckoning that had upended his life. When he emerged from his suite later that morning, he found Amara in the servants' quarters, quietly feeding Malik. The sight struck him. A young mother, patient, loving, dignified despite everything. The power dynamic that had always defined him in the house felt irrelevant here. "Amara," he said, his voice low and careful. I want to help, not because I can command it, but because I want to." Amara looked up, wary but perceptive. "Help? How exactly?" He hesitated. "Whatever you need, Malik. Safety. You, peace. I can't undo what's happened, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again." Her eyes studied him, searching for sincerity. The walls around her had been built over years of fear and judgment, yet something in Ethan's posture, tentative, unguarded, spoke to a change that was undeniable. The ripple effects extended beyond the household. News of the confrontation and Ethan's public vulnerability spread through the city's social circles. The elite, who had once whispered behind crystal glasses, now viewed Amara with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. The narrative shifted. She was no longer just a maid with a secret. She was a woman who had confronted power, protected her child, and emerged with dignity intact. Even the younger staff who had mocked her found themselves reassessing their assumptions. Some offered quiet apologies, while others simply watched with newfound respect. Amara's quiet strength had rewritten the rules of the house, not through defiance, but through courage, compassion, and moral clarity. Ethan observed it all with a mix of awe and self-reproach. His own pride had been stripped bare, revealing a raw, unfiltered vulnerability he had never allowed himself to confront. He realized that power without empathy was hollow, and control without compassion was meaningless. For the first time, he understood that true leadership and true humanity required humility, recognition of one's mistakes, and the courage to make amends. That afternoon, he invited Amara to the study once more. Malik sat on the floor nearby, playing quietly with a small wooden toy. Ethan knelt to Malik's level, offering a tentative smile. The boy responded with the innocent trust only a child can give, crawling into Ethan's lap without hesitation. Amara watched, a quiet swell of emotion in her chest. The billionaire who had once been untouchable was learning to care, to protect and to respect. Not just her son, but her as well. "You were right," Ethan admitted softly, glancing at Amara. "I never considered the courage it would take to protect someone in this world. Not just anyone. You?" Amara's lips curved in a small, gentle smile. "It's not about me, sir. It's about him, and I'll always do whatever it takes for him." Ethan nodded, a silent promise forming in his mind. The balance of power had shifted, not through dominance, but through recognition of strength that came from love and moral courage. By evening, the estate had transformed. The staff treated Amara with respect. Malik's laughter echoed freely through the corridors, and even Ethan found himself laughing quietly at something the child had done. The walls that had once confined them all now seemed to breathe, accommodating a new reality, one where love, protection, and empathy held sway over fear and control. Amara, once isolated and judged, now moved through the estate with a quiet assurance. She had survived the storm of judgment and humiliation and emerged stronger, her dignity intact. Ethan, once ruthless and unyielding, was beginning a journey of humility and understanding, learning to see the world through eyes that recognized courage, sacrifice, and the profound strength of maternal love. And in that subtle, almost cinematic shift, the Whitford estate felt like more than a fortress of wealth. It felt like a place where hearts could change, where redemption was possible, and where innocence and love could triumph over fear and power. The Whitford estate buzzed with an unusual energy that morning, a sense of anticipation threading through the polished marble halls. Word had spread beyond the household. News outlets hinted at a revelation involving the Whitford family, though details remained scarce. Inside, Amara moved quietly, Malik's small hand clutched in hers, both protected and unafraid. She had grown accustomed to scrutiny, but this felt different, less judgmental, more curious, more ready to witness truth. Ethan, dressed in a crisp suit that felt almost ceremonial today, awaited her in the study. The sunlight spilled across the floor, catching the gray in his eyes and softening the hard angles of his face. He had called this meeting not to assert control, but to acknowledge the reality he had once tried to dominate, and to begin righting the injustices he had perpetuated. "Amara," he began, voice steady yet heavy with sincerity, "I have spoken to the board, the staff, and even the public relations team. I want the world to understand something very clearly. You acted out of love, courage, and integrity. Not only have you protected Malik, but you've also reminded me of what truly matters." Amara blinked, unaccustomed to hearing such words from him. She lowered Malik to the floor, letting him explore while she met Ethan's gaze. "I don't want recognition," she said softly. "I just want him safe and our lives." Peaceful, Ethan shook his head. No, you deserve recognition, and not just from me, from everyone who has judged you unfairly, everyone who assumed your worth was defined by your station. He motioned to Charlotte, his assistant, who had quietly observed the household's dynamics over the past week. Arrange for a formal acknowledgement, public, transparent. I want Amara Benson's actions and her courage to be recognized, so no one ever doubts what she's capable of again. Whispers of astonishment moved through the staff as they overheard parts of the conversation. Ruth's eyes glistened. Even the younger maids who had mocked Amara now bowed their heads, humbled by the billionaire's uncharacteristic act of public accountability. Ethan turned back to Amara. And I need to acknowledge my own failures. I was cruel, reckless, and blind to what mattered. Not just to Malik, but to you. I am truly sorry. Amara's lips pressed together, her heart tightening. The apology was not just words. It was an admission of vulnerability from someone who had never shown it. Her instinct was to remain guarded, yet she saw the raw honesty in his eyes, the kind of honesty that could not be feigned. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means something." In the following days, the household began to transform. Staff treated Amara not as a subordinate, but as a mother whose courage had altered the very culture of the Whitford estate. Malik laughed freely, running through the halls without fear, his small voice a constant reminder of the stakes that had brought everyone to reckoning. Ethan took deliberate steps to rebuild the atmosphere within his home. He met with staff members, acknowledged past errors, and implemented changes that allowed for transparency and respect. He began spending genuine time with Malik, tentative at first, learning the rhythms of fatherhood, with awkward but heartfelt sincerity. One evening, during a quiet moment in the drawing room, Ethan knelt on the floor beside Malik, letting the boy crawl into his lap. "I promise," he said, voice soft, "I will do better. I will protect you as your mother has, and I will try to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." Amara watched from the doorway, a mixture of relief and guarded hope settling over her. The billionaire's transformation was not complete, and she would remain vigilant. But the first steps toward justice, respect, and recognition had been taken. And finally, for the first time since the revelation, the Whitford estate felt balanced, not through fear or control, but through acknowledgement, respect, and the quiet triumph of moral courage. The injustice had been confronted, the wrongdoing exposed, and the power of love and integrity had prevailed. Outside the estate, the city began to notice a shift as well. Articles, interviews, and social posts celebrated Amara's bravery, her dignity, and the humanity she had forced Ethan to confront. She was no longer invisible, no longer merely a caretaker or a secret. She had become a symbol of strength, resilience, and the triumph of moral courage over fear and arrogance. Ethan, sitting alone for a moment, reflected on the profound transformation that had taken place, not just in the household, but within himself. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be human, to recognize one's failings, to act with empathy, and to honor those who embody courage and love beyond the boundaries of wealth, status, or power. In the quiet, cinematic stillness of the estate, a new chapter had begun. A chapter in which the walls of marble and steel were no longer merely symbols of control, but witnesses to redemption, recognition, and the enduring strength of love and moral courage. The Whitford estate awoke to a soft morning light that filtered through the towering windows, casting warm golden hues across the polished floors. It was a calm unlike any the house had known in weeks, subtle, yet charged with the kind of peace that follows a storm. Amara Benson stood near the kitchen doorway, Malik perched on her hip, yawning and stretching as if he sensed the world around him had shifted in his favor. Ethan Whitford entered the room, uncharacteristically casual in a simple sweater and slacks. There was no suit, no commanding posture, no icy authority. Just a man trying to navigate a life he had never truly understood. Until now. He paused to watch Amara with Malik, who babbled softly, pointing to a small wooden horse on the counter. Ethan knelt, letting the child crawl into his lap, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "You see that?" Ethan asked gently, tilting the toy so Malik could grasp it. "It's not about power, or wealth, or any of the things I used to think mattered most." Malik giggled, the sound breaking like sunlight through glass, and Amara's eyes softened as she watched the billionaire, once untouchable, now humbled, interact with her son. The man who had been so cruel, so calculated, now showed patience, tenderness, and a burgeoning understanding of love and responsibility. Amara knelt beside them, brushing a loose curl from Malik's forehead. "He's learning," she said quietly. "It's not just about you, Ethan. It's about all of us, and the way we choose to treat each other." Ethan met her gaze, his gray eyes reflecting a depth that had not been there before. "You've taught me more in these past days than I've ever learned in my life," he admitted, voice low but sincere. "About courage, about protection, about what it means to care without expecting anything in return. And I'm grateful." Amara's lips curved into a gentle, knowing smile. "Gratitude is a start," she said, "but the rest comes with consistency and choices. Choices to act with respect, empathy, and understanding every day. That's how change lasts." The household had begun to shift too. Staff who had once whispered and judged now offered quiet nods of acknowledgement. Ruth, the older maid, approached Amara and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've changed the entire dynamic of this house," she said softly. "And you've done it without losing your dignity, without giving in to anger or resentment. That is rare." Outside, the city's whispers had become recognition. Articles celebrated Amara's bravery and Ethan's humbling, the story becoming a subtle yet powerful reminder that moral courage could surpass wealth and influence. For the first time, Amara felt that her sacrifices and the quiet battles she had fought had been seen and valued. Later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long, warm shadows across the estate, Ethan and Amara found themselves alone on the terrace. Malik played at their feet, building towers with wooden blocks, oblivious to the weight of the adult's reflections. I don't expect forgiveness," Ethan said, his voice soft, carrying a vulnerability that had been impossible weeks ago. "But I hope that one day you can see I've changed, that I've learned something real, something I should have understood a long time ago." Amara knelt beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "Change isn't about perfection," she said gently. "It's about growth and learning to do better each day. I see that in you." Ethan exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest, and for a moment the silence between them was warm, almost sacred. The mansion, the empire, the expectations, they all felt distant, irrelevant. What mattered was here, the fragile, extraordinary bond forming between mother, child, and the man who had finally recognized their humanity. As night fell, Malik fell asleep between them, a small, steady presence that symbolized innocence, hope, and the moral victories earned through courage and love. Amara and Ethan watched him for a long moment, their hands brushing lightly, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had endured together. The Whitford estate, once a fortress of power and intimidation, now carried a new story within its walls, a story of recognition, empathy, and quiet triumph. And in that story, Amara Benson's courage shone brightest, proof that love, sacrifice, and moral integrity could challenge even the most formidable forces, reshape the world around them, and heal hearts thought untouchable. The camera of the mind lingers on that terrace, the golden light, the gentle breeze, the quiet laughter of a child asleep, and two adults beginning a tentative, hopeful chapter of understanding, redemption, and shared humanity. The storm has passed, leaving only the quiet, cinematic glow of lives transformed, and a promise that courage and love endure beyond fear, judgment, or wealth. The story closes, not with grand fanfare, but with the tender, earned peace of a world forever changed by the strength of a mother's love, and the humility of a man who finally understood what truly mattered.